Father Rollie Hautz here, pastor and president of St. Bernard Church in Gay City, Virginia. But most of the stories I like to share have to do with St. Paul and Dungannon and maybe Glenmaryans who are no longer with us, starting with Father Burson. He and I used to street preach together. By street preach, I mean from the back of a little trailer. I had this rig that I hauled behind the truck, and we just jump in the trailer and start talking to crowds that were there, 40 or 50. But I had an amplifier that was very ancient, had been in a fire, and sometimes could be hot. One time we were setting it up, and Burson knew that if it was hot when you had to change the polarity by switching the plug. So he hands me the mic, and zip, I got zapped. And I said, Bob, had you checked this out? And he says, well, yeah. He says, I got zapped too. I said, don't you know to change the polarity? He said, well, maybe it wouldn't hurt you because it's your amplifier. Well, so then he preached on love of neighbor and service of others, something like that. One time, though, with a still hot amplifier, I had Bob Bond helping me out, but he was a seminarian then. And so since he was a lowly seminarian, he preached first, and I'd bring up the main talk at the rear. So I said, be sure you have a good opening. You always want to get the attention of the people. You don't want them to walk away. So yeah, he had in his mind he had to have a good opening. Well, I introduced the thing with some music, and I was standing on the ground, and the microphone laid on your chest and hung with a little chain that you hooked around your neck. I was wearing a jacket, and so it didn't bother me any. But then I introduced the seminarian for Glenmary, Bob Bond, great speaker and all, and he puts the thing around his neck, and he was wearing a T-shirt. Well, he was okay until he jumped onto the steel trailer, which was fastened to the truck that had the amplifier in it. As soon as he hit it, he says, it's biting me, and he jumped up in the air. As long as he was airborne, he was doing fine. As soon as he came back, he got another 120 volts around the neck. Off he would go again. Best opening we ever had. He had the whole crowd captive. Of course, I dashed for the truck and unplugged it right away and then fixed things up. But everybody was mystified from then on to see if we were going to get zapped again while the program was going on. I used to preach with Pat Breheny, and he amazed me one time. We were preaching, we did this many years, but in fact I was still doing it in '67, probably the last one to do any outdoor preaching. And with Pat this one year, we had picked a location behind Dungannon near the railroad track. We were going to preach on heaven and how we have to long for the coming of the Lord and all that. And about the time he started preaching, early in his talk, way down the line, you could hear a train coming, a whistle in a far-off distance. And so he capitalized on that, just, I presume, impromptu. I don't think he had this planned out. But he had us buying the tickets and journeying along through our thing and the whole bit. And as the train got closer and closer, he was talking about how we had to be prepared to meet the Lord and how he's going to come in glory and the whole bit. And when the train came roaring behind where we were preaching, he had us entering the gates of heaven just like that. One of the best talks I've ever heard, and obviously I didn't forget it even after all these years. Another Pat Breheny story. When he was there in Dungannon, he was going to stay overnight for a few days, and so he bought some groceries. Now, this story is so old, like 40 years, that they didn't have fencing laws yet. So, I mean, cows could roam around and nibble on your front grass if need be. Well, he brought a lot of groceries, including some apples that he had put on the ledge right by that back window. When he got to St. Patrick's in Dungannon, he took 2 bags of groceries and carried them into the hall to put them away. But he left the back door of his, he had a 4-door car. He left the back door open. And he went in and put all the groceries away. And when he came out, he looked at his car, and what he saw was the rear end of a cow standing on the ground with its knees on the back seat, eating his apples that were on the back ledge. So much for Pat Breheny. As far as other stories in that area, I mentioned Father Bob Burson. He preceded me in Hunters Valley. And this is really way out. I think things are primitive there, including a little store called Osborne's Store, which you could buy some things and get your car fixed and the whole bit. Well, Mr. Osborne was a mechanic. He liked to work on cars, but he'd sell groceries and all. So Bob thought he might like to have some lunch meat or something to eat. He's going to be there at least for a day or two. So he stopped in the store and observed the situation, but the proprietor wasn't there. So he called him in from out under a car where he was changing the grease or something. So the guy comes out filthy dirty from under this car, and as soon as he gets in, Bob says, sir, I think you forgot, you left your meat case open. And lo and behold, here's a cat sitting in the meat case just gobbling up the hamburger. So the man says, oh, thank you, sir. And he reaches in, grabs the cat, and slams the meat case shut. Bob decided, well, he wouldn't get any hamburger. He says, well, how about some bologna? So the guy had a whole sheaf of bologna there, which he grabs and comes out. Then he goes over to the meat cuttings place, and he whips out a big knife, and he looks at it. And he didn't like the looks of the knife, so he wipes it on these filthy overalls, and it starts cutting off the bologna. The way life was out there in Hunter's Valley. Actually, Father Bob Burson, he sure says prayers right. One time he almost killed himself out there in the valley. It was bitterly cold. He was going to stay the night, and there were two little rooms right behind the church proper. But to sleep, you had to crawl up a ladder and crawl over one of the rooms. And so you were just kind of hermetically sealed right up against the roof. If there was a soft rain, it sounded really nice. I've slept there many times. Anyway, this one cold night, Bob filled the hot-belly stove in the church. He filled it with coal and forgot to close the damper. Well, the next morning when he woke up, he thought it would be nice and toasty in there. Well, it had gotten so toasty. Fortunately, he didn't burn the place down. The chimney and all was able to hold this tremendous heat. The heat was so tremendous, they walked into the church the next morning, the candles had melted and fallen over. This is the middle of winter. And so, fortunately, he survived that one. The Hunter's Valley Church was rather unique. It had a little church there where people could worship, and then behind two little rooms, but no real confessional. So, Bob, being improvising, he rigged up a confessional with a door between two rooms and drilled some holes in there so that he could sit on one side, and later on I did. I would sit on one side, I announced confession, and people would come in, and there's a kneeler there. They could kneel on the other side. But wisely, Bob Burson had taken a piece of plastic and draped it down over all those holes. And after the first time I heard confessions, I realized why. This is back in Hunter's Valley, where they dip snuff. And all this tobacco juice is running down the plastic, which of course would come shooting through the holes if you weren't protected. That's the way life was out there in the valley. Going back to St. Paul, I'd like to mention a story with Brother Vince. He was great when he was with me, hauling kids all over the place, had his own football team, a baseball team really. And the Civitans, they had started this program expecting 60 kids to show up, so they had uniforms and the whole bit. 120 kids showed up. So in effect, Brother Vince wound up having the other teams, but the Civitans would buy a hat for the different teams. Our team, the Catholic team, was the Senators. In ancient history, named after, of course, the Washington Senators and all that. Goes back pretty far, but that was the name, so all our little boys had a little S on their cap. Brother Vince, being a very fervent guy, he didn't want to miss a chance to evangelize, so he taught these kids their prayers, and he would bring them to the ball games. Before they could play in a game, they had to pray. Of course, their favorite prayer was the Hail Mary. And so he would lead the Hail Mary with all these little Baptist kids around him, and he listened one day, and one of the kids was saying, "Pray for us senators, now and at the hour of our death, amen." So much for Brother Vince, and Bob Burson. I would like to mention another Glenmary who's no longer with us, but a tremendous friend of mine, Father John Garvey. My favorite John Garvey story, I could give you a legion of those, but it was when he was pastor of Moorhead, Kentucky at the time. And like myself, he didn't wear a suit coat very often, but anyway, he would wear it on occasion. And this time there was a wedding, and so he had to get dressed up for all that. And after he performed the wedding at Moorhead there, they went through all the traditional things, including the bride throwing her garter over her shoulder. Well, of all things, who should catch it but John Garvey? So, okay, so everybody got a big laugh out of that, and he puts it in his pocket, and that's the end of the story, kind of. Now it's about 6 months later, maybe 8 months, I don't know, a while later, and he hasn't worn the suit since. But a professor died. The professor wasn't Catholic, but his wife was. So, being a man of the cloth, John comes all dressed up, and the widow's over in a corner crying all by herself. Other professors are standing around the coffin talking about how good the guy was and things like that. Well, John felt obligated to sit alongside the widow and see what he could do. So he sits down there, and her tears are lousy up for mascara. So he's sitting there trying to find a good word, and he reaches into his suit coat pocket for his handkerchief and pulls out this garter. So here's this woman crying, all of a sudden she's looking in front of her eyes and finds a woman's garter hanging in front of her face. I said, John, what did you do? He said, I put it back in my pocket. And so John just put it there. But I kind of like to wind up with my favorite story with John Garvey. He and I hiked a lot. And this one time we were coming in from Sam's Gap. That's where Tennessee and North Carolina meet, a little, about maybe 30, 40 miles south of Asheville. The Appalachian Trail goes across there, and we'd parked and hiked in about a day, and as was our wont, John carried all the food. I carried a Mass kit. So we would say Mass every day out there in the wilderness someplace, and as we hiked along, about around 5 in the evening, we found this beautiful knoll sitting off there in the distance with one huge tree and a view that wouldn't quit. So we decided, great place to spend the night. So we went on over and camped under the tree, and first thing we did, I broke out my gear and we offered Mass. And I hope this was as much a mystical experience for John as it was for me, but I'll sure never forget it, and I'm sure he didn't either. We had just offered Mass, and as was our wont, after receiving Holy Communion, we would have maybe 5 or 10 minutes of just quiet sitting there thinking of the beauty of the place and what a privilege it is to receive Jesus and the whole bit. We had just begun our Thanksgiving of Communion, and about 100 birds came flying in from all over the place and landed in this tree and just started singing like all get out. Without doubt, the best Thanksgiving